test here. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. I'll let people grab their seats and we will get started here. So hi everybody. Thank you so much for being here, for joining us tonight. My name is Tara Borbietsky. I am here in my role as co-chair for the Ottawa chapter of Unplugged Canada. I'm also a parent of 3. And like many of you, I am still trying to navigate questions that can feel increasingly complicated in the digital world right now. When is the right time to give my kids a smartphone? What apps, if any, are actually safe? I still really don't know what Roblox is. And I honestly don't know if I want to find out. But I think many parents are feeling overwhelmed because this digital world is evolving faster than most of us were ever prepared for. So I want to begin by thanking Severn Avenue School Council and the community here. I'm especially grateful to be welcomed here tonight, and it really speaks to the strength of the school community that conversations like this are being brought forward in such an open and thoughtful way. For anyone who may not know, who may be new to our work, Unplugged Canada is a grassroots, parent-led initiative focused on supporting healthier childhood development, stronger family connection, and more intentional approaches to technology use in homes, schools, and communities. The purpose of tonight is very simple. It's to create space for learning, for evidence-based conversation, and for honest reflection about what families are seeing and experiencing right now, especially as parents try to balance independence, connection, safety, and healthy development in a world where smartphones and social media are reaching kids younger and younger. We're very fortunate to be joined by 2 incredible speakers who bring both professional expertise and research insight into this topic. All right, just to briefly kind of share with you the flow of the evening, we will begin with presentations from our 2 wonderful speakers here. We'll have a short moderated discussion, and then we will open things up for discussion and audience questions, okay? So please think of some things to ask. Hopefully we can get to as many as possible. We will aim to keep this conversational and grounded and keep the flow so we can, enjoy our evening afterwards. All right, we're going to begin with our first speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce Alex Munter. Alex is the CEO of the Canadian Medical Association and has also previously served as the CEO of CHEO here in Ottawa. He brings a deep background in public health leadership and child and youth advocacy, and we are grateful for his perspective on the broader health implications of the issues we're discussing tonight. Please join me in welcoming Alex Munter.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Thanks for the invitation to be here. We are all part of a movement of parents and concerned citizens who want to make a difference, and so it's really gratifying to see you here. I just want to talk a little bit about my experience working in the children's health space and in the broader health environment from a policy perspective. And then Holly, I think, has more tactical, practical help and data for you. So I spent 13 years as CEO of CHEO, and I started in 2011. I come from a number of different roles in my past, including being a newspaper person. What's your name again? Nadia. We both grew up in Canada. And I've been at the Youth Services Bureau of Ottawa as the executive director there. At that time, and I think it's important, we talk a lot about the situation in terms of mental health with young people now. Important to remember that between 2000 and 2009, when it comes to emergency department visits, so adolescents primarily going to emergency departments in Ontario for self-harm, the ratio is declining. Year over year, there were fewer kids adolescents going to emergency department to self-harm, and the number of visits for mental health crisis was stable. So it's not another century. That was relatively recent. And then in 2009-10, started to see an increase. And so I arrived at CHEO in 2011. as the surge was starting to happen. And I remember some of my earliest meetings as I onboarded into the organization and started to understand what the big operational issues are, is the mental health units were full, the emergency department was struggling with a number of crisis visits, and we didn't really at that time understand what was happening. And our best hypothesis was that there had been a lot of work, a lot of public awareness around encouraging people to seek help, encouraging parents to seek help for their kids, encouraging young people to seek help. And you may recall around that time, Daniel Alfredson from the Sands was very visible with his campaign around trying to reduce the stigma related to anxiety and depression and encouraging people to seek help. And so our hypothesis at the time was that really this was the result of that destigmatization, of people being encouraged to seek help, and that there wasn't necessarily an increase in prevalence. There weren't more kids suffering from anxiety and depression. There were just more kids coming forward, which is a good thing. And how do we improve our service system? How do we add people capacity to be able to respond to that? And then year over year over year, it just continued to increase. The number of visits, the occupancy, the pressures continued to increase. And so we added programs, we created new programs, we recruited more staff. I was at CHEO for 13 years, so 2011 to 2024. In that 13-year period, we doubled the child and mental health budget, and we tripled the number of staff working in that area. So more beds, more clinics, more services, more programs, and still not enough, right? And so it started to dawn on us, slow learners, it started to dawn on us that something else was going on here. And so it started to become a hypothesis in kind of the late 2010s that this really had to be related to these. iPhone only introduced in 2008, 2009. And so some research started, and I guess we probably shared some more research. But certainly at CHEO, there started to be some research, and then the pandemic arrived. And the pandemic really accelerated that increase in demand. And we, again, at this point, we were pretty sure there's a correlation here. We were struggling to assert that there was causation, that one was leading to the other, that social media was leading to the other. Of course, over the last 4 or 5 years, there's been enough research that we know there is a causal link. And we know because some of that research was actually conducted and hidden by the social media companies, right? And the problem, the problem is not the content, right? There's every manner of unspeakable, horrible content on the internet, and if you want to go find it, you can find it. The problem with these technologies is that they push content through their algorithms into our brains and into the developing brains of our kids. There's been lots of research done to show that if you create fake profiles, avatars of young teenage girls, young teenage boys, and provide no information to the platform other than that demographic, the teenage girls will be fed content, a lot of body image, self-harm content, and the young boys will be fed a lot of porn and misogynistic content. That's what the algorithm thinks they're going to be interested in, and that it's not really what they're interested in, it's about hooking them, right? It's about making them lifelong customers. And so we're in a situation now, in the absence of regulation in Canada, in North America, where we as parents, it's a parental no up against the biggest corporations in the world, deploying the most sophisticated technology in the world to get into our kids' brains. And that's not a fair fight. And so there's a lot of advocacy in the organization that with now the Canadian Medical Association is advocating for regulation, and we can talk about that if you like. Lots of children's health organizations, Canadian Pediatric Society, CHEO, Sick Kids, others as well. That's important. But we're not powerless as parents. And I got involved as a parent with Unplugged because Unplugged is, I think, an exciting way in which we can band together. And Robin Aaron at the back there, who is our fearless leader, Unplugged leader at Muchmore School, where we have kids in grade 2. And we're up to, I think, maybe 40% of the kids, 40% of the parents have signed the pledge. And the pledge is not to give your kid a smartphone until at least grade 9. And what that pledge does is it creates a norm, right? Because we know that it's the peer pressure of my kid telling Robin's kid, well, I have a phone, we should get a phone. And so if we can create a norm in our neighborhood, in our school community, that says, no, you don't, that's a high school thing. And it's interesting because my son has now assimilated that. Like he now, and he will say, I'm going to get a smartphone in grade 9. I said, well, I'm going to talk about it. But he's grade 2. I got time. We'll work on this. And Robin at the back has some various examples of tools like flip phones and dumb phones, basically other vehicles that can be used for communication with kids. But I'm excited about Unplugged because I think it's a way for us to reclaim some of our power. I think there's and I'll end on this note, I think there's a really instructive example or parallel to smoking and tobacco cessation. And smoking rates are very, very low in Canada. Now they worked always. And what reduced smoking rates was public education, high tobacco taxes because kids are very price-sensitive shoppers, teenagers, prohibiting marketing of tobacco, smoke-free public spaces and workplaces. All of those measures together, no one measure changed that trajectory. It was all of them kind of together. Now, I do think it's unfair to compare big tech to tobacco companies. It's unfair to tobacco companies because big tech is running this uncontrolled experiment on our kids' brains. And so, I encourage you to get involved. There's various ways to talk about that advocacy in terms of government regulation, call your MP, all of those things in terms of the regulation we need. But in this school community, for your kids here in this neighborhood, there's something we can do as parents. And I think that's very empowering and powerful. And thank you for being here tonight to be part of this conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. I think we all appreciate some of those words and your perspective as someone in public health and also as a parent. So thank you for that. We are now going to move on to our second speaker, who will bring us a complementary perspective, like Alex mentioned, from the world of neuroscience and research. So it's my pleasure to introduce Holly Shannon. She is a doctoral candidate at Carleton University, and her work focuses on problematic social media use, mental health, and brain-based research using neuroimaging. She's going to help us better understand what's happening at a neurological level when it comes to digital media and social media engagement. So please join me in welcoming Holly.
Okay, thank you for having me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my research that I've been working on for my thesis, and hopefully you have some takeaways for you all. So as Alex mentioned, a lot of social media platforms are designed in a way to engage us and keep us engaged. So for this reason, I look at social media use through kind of a lens of addiction. So So I first want to start out by saying that kind of generally, addiction is the loss of control over a reward-seeking behavior. Now, a lot of times we think of this in terms of substance use, but in recent years we're recognizing that there's also behavioral addictions. So you've probably heard of gambling disorder as an example of a behavioral addiction. But in terms of social media use, there's actually no problematic social media use or social media addiction is not recognized diagnostically. So that is kind of part of the problem we're beginning with is how do we even characterize it? So in terms of research, we have some questionnaires to measure what we call problematic social media use, where we look at it through an addictions lens. So these are kind of the 6 core criteria that we look at when diagnosing a substance use disorder or something like gambling disorder. So in terms of social media, salience is the idea that you're thinking about social media all the time, even when you're not using it. You're using social media with the intention of modifying your mood, or it could be that you're using social media so much that it results in mood modifications. Another key component to that is conflict. So you're neglecting personal relationships. You can't keep up with school or work responsibilities. There's also tolerance where you're using social media more and more. Relapse is the idea that you are trying to cut back your social media use or abstain from social media, but then revert back to how you used it before. And withdrawal is just the idea that there's negative emotional states or disturbances like sleep. Again, if you try and cut back or stop your social media use. So these are kind of all the characteristics that we use to define problematic social media use. And this can be looked at as in a spectrum. So there might be some of you that I see yourself in 1 or 2 of those characteristics. That does not mean you have a social media addiction. It's kind of when you're hitting all of these core characteristics that we're really looking at when you have problematic use. And so one of the first studies that I did is to focus on problematic social media use and how it affects our mental health. So to do this, we had just over 100 university students come in, and they completed a whole bunch of questionnaires about their mental health and social media use, and then came back 4 weeks later and did all of the same questionnaires again. And so these are the results here. So these are you can see, try and use this. So these are the different mental health outcomes we looked at: depressive symptom, anxiety, stress, resilience, and loneliness. And you'll notice on this top line here, those are how each one is correlated with problematic social media use. And these are all moderate and what we call statistically significant. Whereas if you look at just frequency of use alone, so that's just asking how many hours a day are you on social media, all those numbers are very close to 0. So there's no relationships there. So what I really want to highlight here is it's really that idea of problematic social media use that's most implicated with mental health, not just frequency alone. Sorry. And then this is looking at over that 4-week period. So it's very interesting. Any students that had worse mental health at that first baseline visit, that did not predict a later increase in problematic social media use. But you'll see in these graphs here, along the bottom is your levels of problematic use if they increased over that 4-week period. And you'll see, there we go. There's trends in all of these. So as problematic social media use increased over that 4-week period, we also saw increases in depressive symptoms, increases in stress, and increases in loneliness. So again, you can really see here that it's a problematic social media use that's really tied to worse mental health outcomes. And I just want to highlight another study that I collaborated on during the COVID-19 pandemic. And here we really wanted to focus on the idea of using social media to cope. So all these, oh, I keep hitting the wrong buttons. There we go. All these black bars here are students who reported using social media with the intention to cope, whereas all these bars that are in white, no intention to cope, and gray is moderate. So again, you can really see here that using social media to cope is correlated with, again, high depression, high stress, and higher anxiety. And that idea of using social media to cope is also correlated with more problematic use. And so what about the brain? So here I just want to show that the reward system of the brain is not just in one spot. It is a bunch of different brain regions, and they all have different components, basically. So the next study that we did is to look at what is happening in the brain, but also how does this interact with your mental health and with your social media behaviors in possibly predicting problematic use. So from this, we had a whole bunch of students again come in, and they actually did a MRI scan. And these are, again, these are, so again, we took a whole bunch of regions that are involved in your reward system and looked at the volume of those regions. And then again, asked a whole bunch of questions that I have listed on the right there about your social media behaviors, your mental health. And we wanted to see from all of these measures, can we create profiles or clusters of variables that would predict problematic use? So from this, we found three kind of clusters or profiles of use that were associated with problematic social media use. So in the first one, we characterize this as negative mental health, which again is not surprising from some of the previous research, where high anxiety, high stress, high depression, and low resilience, all of those clustered together are significant predictors of problematic social media use. The next one is more this profile of how you use social media. So high intensity of use indicates a large emotional investment in social media. Active use is the idea that you're actively liking, commenting, interacting with other individuals. We also see this consisted of having a higher number of friends, both on and offline, and having more social media platforms. So all of these together kind of represent a profile of very active emotional engagement to social media. And again, this was very correlated with problematic use. And the last profile is a little bit different. So this one, we see high passive use, so the idea of just kind of scrolling and not interacting, together with less friends on and off social media, high frequency, and a high number of years of using social media. These all together are showing more of a habitual passive use profile. So you're using social media frequently, you've been using it for a long time, but you have these very passive patterns of use. So again, all of these are very associated with problematic use. And then we wanted to look at, do these profiles, are they differently associated with those characteristics of problematic use that I talked about at the beginning? So you'll see this idea of negative mental health is seen across all of those characteristics of problematic use. It's seen with salience, relapse, withdrawal, etc. And this idea of active emotional engagement is seen in almost all characteristics except for relapse. So this was interesting. Whereas that idea of habitual passive use only really seems to be implicated when you're looking at salience in terms of problematic use, or your preoccupation. So it really seems like this profile of negative mental health and being a very active, emotionally engaged social media user are what are most kind of correlated with having problematic use. In terms of the brain, we didn't see a whole lot from this, so I have a little image there on the right. So these are all the brain regions we looked at, and almost all of them clustered together, but were only correlated if you look at withdrawal aspects of problematic use. Now, in this study, we didn't have a ton of participants that were scoring very high in problematic use or had long-term problematic use, so it's very hard to say kind of right now the implications of the brain. There's a few studies that actually have mimicked Instagram during an MRI scan, and they'll find certain social media aspects, like looking at photos with a higher number of likes compared to less likes, your reward system's firing, but we don't know yet kind of those long-term effects and if there's permanent changes to the brain. So that's something that really kind of needs to be researched more. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is getting into a little bit more of a public health and policy perspective. So I partnered with some folks from Vancouver Coastal Health, and we actually were looking at learnings from tobacco and gambling public health frameworks to see if some of that could be applied to problematic social media use. So these are some of the things that we looked at. So broadly, in terms of health protection, we touched a little bit on the idea of an age ban, or the idea of regulation from the government. Now, I don't think an age ban on its own is going to be a fix to everything, but it is one of kind of a step in the right direction that can be helpful. Another aspect is preventative intervention. So early intervention before you're getting into kind of problematic social media use territory. So one thing that I didn't talk about, but we looked at with mental health, is the idea of resilience. So resilience is kind of your ability to bounce back from a stressor, and you can actually build up your resilience. And this seems to be possibly a protective factor in those negative mental health outcomes that we see. Another thing is health promotion in terms of just environment outside of social media. So kind of any kind of activities or sports, anything to promote offline behavior and social connections, I think is great. And the last thing I want to touch on is just assessment and surveillance. So awareness of not only your social media use, but things like problematic use. I've given a few presentations to students, and I will ask them to estimate their hours of social media use and then get them to go check on their phone, and a lot of them are pretty shocked and quite heavily underestimated their hours of use. So I think any sort of tools to be aware of your social media habits. There's a lot of digital literacy resources coming out, and just usage kind of patterns in general. I also like to kind of preach the idea of mindfulness. So when you're pulling out your phone, try to think about, why are you going on social media in the first place? After you've scrolled for a while, stop and try and think, how do you feel? Is this impacting your mental health? Are you seeing content that you can maybe unfollow or block that is making you feel worse? So kind of tailoring your social media use to what is benefiting you rather than kind of, I guess, being detrimental to your mental health. And yeah, that's all I have. Shout out to my supervisors at Royal Carleton. My research wouldn't be possible without them. And I've also created with a colleague this Mindful Media Instagram page where we try and share research about social media use that's coming out and promote different resources available as well. Thank you.
Robin in the back, the parent that I was at much more same school, she's got some practical ideas.
Yeah, that kind of practical ideas for other things that we can give our kids when they're younger instead of a smartphone. And so I thought we might want to hear from her, because we just have a little bit more time, that might be helpful for us as parents to know, like, okay, we don't want to have a cell phone, so now what do I do? And how do my kids talk to each other, or like with their friends? So I'm going to pass it over to Robin.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me up here tonight, and what great presentation. So interesting, covering off so many different angles, and I think that your points around being mindful of what's happening when we're on social media is so great as parents and guardians when we're trying to model that helpful behavior for our kiddos. So yeah, there are lots of alternatives. The big alternative, I think that's great, is a landline, of course. So I know there's, an added expense to that, but it can be quite minimal, around $10 a month. So for many families, that is a great option, a great alternative. If there's a barrier with the cost there, what some families are doing is taking one of the parents or the solo parent's phone and plugging it in the kitchen, keeping it plugged in on a permanent basis or close to permanent, and calling out the landline. So it doesn't move anywhere, it just stays in the kitchen. We call it sometimes a text space or a text station, and it just stays there. And it is treated like a landline for the whole family. There are other great alternatives like the TCL flip phone, so I'm going to give that little black flip phone to you if you'd like to open it up. So I actually tried this out for 4 days over the winter break myself, because part of it, if we're daring enough, is to embrace some of this digital minimalism ourselves, right? And that can be great for our own mental health. But this phone is wonderful. If you're looking for an alternative to a smartphone for your child, for let's say they're commuting for grade 7 and 8 and you'd like them to have a phone, or maybe there's two households that your kiddo is going back and forth to and you would like your child to have a phone, so a flip phone is great. You still have to kind of tune in and pay attention though. Is that going to connect to the internet? So don't get those data packages, just get that talk and text plan and monitor in terms of what's going on. Open up those conversations. There's some great resources. Also at the back, I'd invite you to come over and take a look at that. Another thing we like to try and do, or try and encourage, if you have appetite for it, is to look at some of the ways that your phone, if you have a smartphone, and I've got a smartphone, is attractive to your child, and try and peel back some of those layers in a way that makes the phone less of a bright, shiny object for your kiddo. So the way that smartphones are working today, we use them for everything, right? We use them as a wallet to pay for things. We use them as cameras to take those special family photos, and so much more. So if it's possible, and also for music players, right? So my 7-year-old comes up to me all the time and says, "Mom, can you play Banana Unana?" If you don't know it, it's a great song. Banana Unana. So I encourage you to look that song up. But I want my kid to...
I don't, by the way.
I've been singing it on a daily basis. It is. So I love giving my son control of his own music. So one way we do that is with the Yodo player. This is the travel size. It's great even for preteens. There are lots of young adult fiction books available. They even have Elton John and the Beatles cards that you can play. You can test it tonight if you like. You can come over to the back table. For the younger kids, there's something called a Tony box. It's really fun. It's red. It's on the table. Come over and give it a try if you like. So there's so many options out there now. I talk about it in terms of sometimes medicine formulation. The smartphone is not formulated. It's not a pediatric formulation. It's not formulated or designed for kids. In fact, it's not even really designed for us, right, in terms of being healthy. But how can we look for that child-friendly technology, or a technology that's more child-friendly? So lots of options out there. There's also the pinwheel phone, which looks like a smartphone. I think of that in terms of harm reduction. So if you have a kiddo who's already got a smartphone and you're looking to change it up for something a little bit safer, or actually a lot safer, the pinwheel might be an option. It looks and feels like a smartphone, but it has a lot of built-in features, safety features on it. So I'll leave it at that for now. Please feel free to include me in some of your questions if you have questions about the technology, and to visit the table at the end of the evening as well. Thank you.
Thank you. T9 texting is the effort required to send a single text message. It's quite different. Okay, so I think we've heard, from two wonderful speakers. Thank you, Robin, for adding some more context in terms of some other options for us as parents and giving safer alternatives. Because at the end of the day, we don't want to take away connection from our kids, right? I think the whole goal is to maintain connection and, in fact, create some more real world and real life connection. But I want to bring some questions over to Holly and Alex, and I will maybe point it at you guys individually, but please feel free to jump in, or if you have any extra thoughts. Again, we'll try and keep this casual. So I want to start kind of big picture. I think a lot of us are likely more in the parents of younger children stage right now, and we're kind of caught in this early exposure. So I'm gonna maybe point this one to Alex. Things like tablets, YouTube, certain video games. I'm thinking Minecraft and Roblox, but there may be others that I don't know of, or other things that are going on. Messenger kids. For some people, they can seem harmless still. And maybe even socially necessary, right? Especially if all of their friends are playing a game and they don't want to be excluded, or but mom and dad, they're on there, like, can I please join in? What should parents understand about these platforms, or these, we'll call them platforms, games, whatever they are, and how they can shape children's social development, their attention, their emotional well-being earlier than we sometimes realize. So, like, what's the harm in these things truly for exposing our younger kids to them? Alex?
Yeah, so you're a little bit beyond my area of expertise, but I would say there's a growing body of knowledge and research around, for example, even EdTech, and the fact that it is not as productive as we might imagine, and in fact can have unintended harms. And so we are. I used the term earlier. We're in this massive uncontrolled experiment on kids' brains. So the honest answer for a lot of these things is we don't know, because we don't have. We're starting to accumulate the longitudinal evidence of impact, and I think the simple maxim, I think, that for those of us that have young kids is less is better. Less is better. So we all make choices. So we have an iPad that she uses sometimes, and we have like Khan Academy Kids on it, which I think has probably limited educational value, but is entertaining and doing math, tricks him into doing math. So feels relatively benign, but it's not as good as a book. It's not as good as interaction with a person, and it's very, very different from if we all grew up watching television, right? And there's the interaction that you have with a television program is very different than the interaction you have with a screen where you're in a conversation of sorts with the device. So I just think less is better, especially while we're still trying to understand what the actual impacts were. And your research is primarily with young adults, right? Yeah. And so some of the research in CHEO, Dr. Goldfield, for example, if I were to summarize it, it's probably not how he would put it, but if I were to summarize his research, it would be less tablets, happier kids. More screens, unhappier kids. that's what his research, multiple studies, has shown.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, kind of prolonging, limiting use as much as you can. In terms of the brain, kids are even more vulnerable to social reward. So even, I guess, it is hard to avoid some social media platforms. I know like YouTube can be helpful. I think to scale mode, that makes it kind of less stimulating. So I think, again, yes, kind of limit use as much as you can, and if you are using these different social media platforms, try and also tailor it as much as you can to, again, kind of, I guess, stop those design features like that autoplay.
Awesome, thank you. I think that's really helpful and some practical tips. I know I heard the grayscale feature, I feel like last week, which was new to me, but you know, neat little hack, I think, even for us as adults, to make it less appealing and less tempting to pull that phone out, or iPad, I'm assuming, probably has the same features. So thank you for that. Okay, so Holly, you were talking about problematic use specifically. I think there are many parents that are struggling to know what's typical, and again, I think we have a lot more parents with younger kids, maybe some with, you know, getting into that preteen stage, maybe even some teenage parents here as well. Sorry, parents of teenagers, I mean. I'm wondering, what are some early signs that a young person's relationship with social media, or maybe screens in general, is becoming unhealthy or concerning? Like, before it gets to that problematic use, what are some signs that might be approaching?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think the biggest things are any sort of impedance on your daily life. So as I mentioned before, if you start neglecting schoolwork to go on social media, if you have teenagers that are working, you might be neglecting job responsibilities, being kind of interacting more online versus kind of if you start noticing less and less in-person social interactions. I think those are probably some of the biggest more red flags, is when it starts to really inhibit your life and kind of change your social functioning.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna ask, I think, maybe one more, and then we'll open it up to all of you if you have any questions. And I wanna talk maybe more about boundaries, and Alex, I'll point this one towards you, but again, Holly, if you have anything you wanna add after, please do. Okay, so we've talked about maybe some tips, tricks, hacks to make it less appealing, but what about these kids that don't have that maturity, we'll say, to be like, okay, you know, I've been on here for half an hour, I think it's time I shut this off. I don't know a lot of adults that even can make that decision, and so asking kids to monitor that themselves can be a little bit challenging. So what are some realistic, maybe developmentally appropriate strategies that could work in households with children and teens? So, you know, maybe that's bedtime routines, certain zones where we keep phones away. Like, do you have any ideas or anything that's worked for you, or that you know, things that you have?
So as you said, Holly, the delaying the onset is number one, right? So that's the I feel like a shameless shill here, but it's the Unplugged campaign, right? It's just no phone till high school. We know no devices in the bedroom, no screens of any kind in the bedroom. To Robin's earlier point, worth pointing out perhaps that Robin is a social worker by profession. In parental involvement, and I know that's hard from a time perspective, but not kind of handing off the devices without limitations on time or destination on them, and really, and so I have a 7-year-old. I don't know what it's like to have a 17-year-old to come talk to me in 10 years. I hear it's much harder. in terms of being engaged with them. But one of the things that I found really interesting at CHEO in the pandemic was that, you know, we had this huge surge in mostly girls, but some boys with eating disorder. So we had a 300% increase in admissions, and the kids, and to be admitted to hospital with an eating disorder, you have to be physically quite compromised, so low oxygen, low nutrition. You know, at one point we had five times as many patients as we had beds. So we were putting eating disorder patients in not the cancer unit, the surgery unit, anywhere there was a bed. And so, you know, I talked to the clinicians, right? There was for sure a link to social media, but not all girls on social media got an eating disorder, right? And so it's like any other illness or a disorder is some mixture of genes, environment, circumstance, external stimulus that makes any of us vulnerable to whether it's a health disorder, diabetes, cancer, whatever, right? And we don't always really know that very well. And so I think the important thing really is the relation, to your point, is the relational piece and doing what works for your kid in their environment and their circumstance. And that's going to be different for your kid than it is for mine, because they're different people, they live in different homes, they go to different schools, they have different genes, all the rest of it, right? So how's that for one answer? Okay.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add. I think it, again, can really depend on the platform too. I've heard a lot of girls talk about Instagram as kind of worse for more social comparison, whereas TikTok seems to be worse for just doom scrolling. So I guess if kind of anything is coming up, maybe thinking about what platforms are being used, and maybe that should change. And also replacing social media use. So if you're trying to reduce it, replace it with something else. If it's more that your kid wants to communicate, maybe try and get them to go on a phone call with a friend instead of texting. Or again, just kind of promoting those offline social interactions as well.
It is, so I'm contradicting myself. One of the really interesting phenomena in particularly adolescent health, if you look at the last kind of 10, 15 years to the time prior to that, when perhaps some of you were teenagers, some of us were teenagers, is impaired driving is down. Teen pregnancy is down, sexually transmitted illness is down, even alcohol use is down. And so that's good. Those are not 14 pregnancy, not a good thing. But it's an indication that those things are down because kids are in their room, they're on there, they're not interacting with, they're not going to parties, they're not interacting with other kids. They may not have any friends, any real friends, and what you or I may think of are like human friends. Maybe we'll start talking about AI chatbots and all that, right? So there's probably kind of some kind of a happy medium between, you know, drunk driving and teen pregnancy and having no friends, but somewhere in there is probably what we should be trying to cultivate for our kids, because I do think that this assault on kids' attention and all of our attention, and kind of taking away kind of some of the humanity in our kids is not a recipe for a happy life.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, you know, and I also think there's so much learning that happens from being in those real world situations. And if we're not exposing our kids to, and again, not to say we want to expose them to some of these drinking and driving, for example, let's keep that where it is. But just to be out in public, to be with friends, to be at, social gatherings, I think that's things we want to encourage too, right, for certain learning and things that have to happen. So, okay, we are, I think, actually pretty much on schedule, which is great. We have 20 minutes. There's lots of time to ask questions if you have any. So I would love to open it up all to you. Thank you again to Holly and Alex for taking the time to be here, for sharing your insight and your expertise. If you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand. I've been instructed, because we are having this recorded, I will repeat the question just to, I guess, make sure that we got the question right, and also so that those watching can hear it properly. And then I'll hand the mic off to whoever you've directed the question at, or whoever wants to answer it if it's kind of directed at both of you, okay? So, first question.
Thank you so much. Super interesting conversation about this. So you mentioned wanting to governance, parents. I'm curious if there's any initiatives to make it with healthcare professionals, educators, and being part of like family curriculum. Are there any initiatives in that sense?
Okay, so we're asking a question about mandated advocacy, essentially with public health, education, kind of beyond more than what just parents can do in terms of policy.
Not to put the vice principal on the spot. I do know that there's an ongoing conversation about digital literacy and how we teach our kids. And it's funny, it's all moving so fast, right? If you were to develop something 4 years ago, would have involved AI, right? And now we're going to kind of teach our kids about, how to, as we are learning ourselves, what is AI and how do we relate to it. On the healthcare side, for sure, particularly in child and youth health, so pediatrics, family medicine, the specialties that are adolescent health, that are psychiatry, that are most likely to see kids. There is more and more, well, first of all, there's a recognition of the problem. And so if you look at the organizations that are advocating for government regulation, you'll see many children's health organizations in there because they're kind of on the front lines of responding. For example, at the Canadian Medical Association, we're looking at what are the tools that we can provide to clinicians to be able to better respond. If you talk to family doctors or pediatricians that have been practicing a long time, so 30 or 40 years, in this community, but anywhere in North America, presumably the world, but North America, I know for sure, they will tell you that the big shift in their practice over that period of time has been from infectious disease to mental health, and for sure we need to. And of course, we may be going back to infectious disease since social media is helping promote messages around that we don't need vaccines and so on. So maybe maybe be all of the above, but that transition and how we support clinicians in that for sure is part of the process. And it was also why the Royal, when you see at the Royal and CHEO and other centers, you see this kind of research that Holly is leading, that is designed ultimately, well, I'm explaining your research, but is designed ultimately to help clinicians, right, be able to better respond.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add to that. That's definitely something we talked about in the public health paper that I handed on, is very much trying to implement screening tools to family physicians or, yeah.
All right, anybody else with a question? Yep.
Hi, so I have a question about screenings and tech for young children. So, as pretty much any parents on social media, we're getting bombarded by parenting content all the time. And advice for screen time can be anywhere from don't give them any screens at all to, well, if you withhold screens and they want it so much more, and it's, this special treat that they want. Do you have any suggestions for parents who are trying to find with an appropriate balance, where you're not withholding it and making it seem like this very special thing they're craving, but also not making it, just a regular part of day-to-day life that they have all the time. Do you have any thoughts on how to strike a balance and what is a good balance for young children and tech?
Okay, so question about screen time and kind of what that balance is from having basically unlimited access to no access at all, and what's that happy balance so we don't create this forbidden fruit, if you will?
So I would refer you to the Canadian Pediatric Society guidelines. They updated them, I want to say a few months ago, probably like 2 years ago. And they would have, and so the Canadian Pediatric Society guidelines on a whole variety of issues, but they're basically rooted in research and clinical guidance. And CPS would have said, maybe 10 years ago, would have said like an hour, max an hour a day. Now they have still that, but they're a bit more nuanced about, like not all screen time is the same. And so, to the point you're making, right? So it's not just a quantity, it's also a quality question. And so, yeah, I would refer to Canadian Pediatric Society Screen Time Guidelines. If you Google that, you'll get the latest advice from Canada's pediatricians, who I would offer are more authoritative than Instagram influencers.
Awesome, thank you. And I will just say, if you have time after, on the Unplugged table over there, I've actually printed out some of those guidelines from the Canadian Pediatric Society, so you're welcome to snap a photo if you want to just see that quickly, but as Alex said, you can certainly find that on their website as well. Okay, next question. Yeah.
So I definitely understand that the idea of Unplugged is like no phones, but that still puts a lot of emphasis on the phone itself, on social media, on the technology. I'm kind of curious if we talk a little more about the alternatives and the replacements, and kind of like what are the benefits of phones that kids are craving? Like, why do they want it so much? And so what is that replacement that comes in that satisfies that need, so it's no longer social media or your phone or your tablet? What is that filling that kids want? So it's not drunk driving, so it's not getting pregnant or pregnant, but that's that either. What is that alternative?
Okay, great question. So looking at alternatives and basically what are we replacing this want for smartphones with if we're taking that away? And what could that look like?
Human connection is being offered from this side of the room as an answer. So for sure that. I would say one of the things I like about Unplugged, what's elegant about it, is it's not taking anything away. It's just saying the time will come, the time's not right now, right? I think when we're done, if you go to the back at Robin's table there, she has some of the kind of specific technological pieces. I do think it depends a little bit on, and again, what your kid's interested in may be different than what my kid's interested in. Is it games? Is it chatting? Is it short videos? Like what is it that they're interested in? And trying to kind of tailor a response to that. But I think that what's interesting is, the market responds to demand, right? And so there's demand from parents for alternatives, and they're starting to come into the market. I would, and there's a researcher at CHEO called Mark Tremblay, who does a lot of research on healthy active living, and to your point around kids need to take risks, and I get that this is hard. Like I struggle with this, every day, because you're worried about your kid's safety. But a big part of it is trying to let them take age-appropriate, developmentally appropriate risks, so that they fail and can develop resilience, and that a skinned knee is just a gamey, and it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I think it very much depends on kind of the age span of where you're at. And again, there's a lot of kind of different motivations that depend on the individual. Social connection is a really big part of that. We actually ran a focus group study that we talk about here in the fall, and it seems like kind of older adults are going to social media for more information seeking, which is less tied to problematic use. Whereas there's a lot of teenagers who are going on social media to keep up with trends and be in the know in different social groups. Whereas those types of motivations seem to be a little bit more detrimental to mental health and kind of perpetuating that problematic use. So I think really honing into what is your motivation for using social media is really important as well.
And I know everybody will know this, so let me make a redundant comment, but so it's things we know but are hard to believe. Your Instagram, and if you've got a teenager, for example, their Instagram are completely different. They're unrecognizable. And I think that's the light bulb I think that's gone on for a lot of regulators, is that maybe 5 years ago we talked a lot about controlling the content and removing inaccurate information, and it's not about the content. It's not about the content. It's about the sophistication of targeting specifically to you the things they know are going to keep you hooked. And for a developing brain, and the brain develops until early 20s, for a developing brain, that's really dangerous. That can be, is inherently dangerous. It can be really dangerous.
Thank you. Okay, right here.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So my question is about EdTech, and we know, or I've seen research that links gaming to sports betting as kind of a conduit for young kids being engaged in behavioral or more at risk of experiencing a behavioral addiction given exposure to gaming. My question is around research that exists related to EdTech and the gamification of educational content, and if there's any research that's been conducted, and if there are strategies around having respectful conversations at the school level in terms of how you can engage in more digital literacy related to usage of EdTech, and if there's any regulation conversation around it.
Okay, so I think there's a few parts to this. So questions about gaming and maybe how it might lead to more problematic use later on, and then connecting it to EdTech and the gamification of learning, and whether or not there are digital literacy strategies or anything coming up or available to either reduce the harm that can come from that or support any policy changes or anything like that. Okay.
Not on my something
I'm a little less familiar with this. I think, yeah, the gamification aspects are kind of the key parts of what is perpetuating that problematic use. I'm less familiar with the EdTech, so I'm thinking kind of along the same lines as if there's any way you can sort of tailor gaming platforms to sort of reduce some of those gamification aspects as much as possible. Yeah, sorry, I don't have much else.
So I'm just looking up. But I'm over the age of 14, so I can be vaguely trusted with the technology. Here it is. Jared Cooney Horvath. So I don't know a lot about EdTech, so I'm going to educate myself. But I refer you to Jared Cooney Horvath, who's How Big Tech Destroys Learning is the headline, but who's done a lot of of research based at Harvard, your people, neuroscience. The digital delusion, how classroom technology harms our kids' learning and how to help them thrive again. So, I'm deferring the question to Jared. Jared Cooney-Horvath. I got a podcast here with him that maybe, can I send it to somebody? I'll send it to somebody and they can share it.
There are definitely discussions right now at the educational level about the amount of tech in schools. Does it need to be pulled upwards versus in the lower grades at all? Like, do we need to pull it completely from grade 1, 2, 3? You know, those discussions are hot and happening right now. At all levels, I know of board discussions that are happening about that to discuss the pros and cons. Nobody's made full decisions on that yet, but as a school, we have been saying you need to be very intentional about what you use it for, specific things, not free time on the computer, but just very, very specific. So if you're doing research that you have assigned websites that they can look at and they can only be on those, and it's only for this. If you're typing, you are learning to type on this, but you are not going wherever. And it's that unstructured time that we need to claw back so that it's not part of that at the school level. And then I would say at the home level, it's that area where whenever a child is bored, they tend to go towards the screen. So it's filling those spaces. I'm bored, I don't know what to do. All right, how can we get our kids back to a creative play zone in that area? Because that area of play is so crucial for development. So how can we gain that back? Whether it's playing a board game, whether it's getting them to build things, whether it's, you know, creating something. Because it's in those spaces that they really develop, just educationally and thoughtfully, and taking the things they've learned in school and putting it into their home play. And that creative in-between is so critical. And when it gets lost, what we get is, I'm bored, I'm looking for something to entertain me, I've lost the skill to entertain myself. And so we see it in classrooms where you are, the kids, if it's not entertaining enough, it's like, this is boring, I don't want to engage in it at all. Whereas when you have the skill, that resilient skill to figure out what to do when you're bored, then you can make those notes in the column while you're listening. It's those tiny skills that you don't even think are skills that they learn because they've learned how to amuse themselves as children, as young children. Now they can amuse themselves and they can just wait in that space to listen. Otherwise, I'm bored, I'm not listening anymore. It's like a shut-off break. And that, I feel like, is that piece of technology that if we can claw that back and get them into learning how to play on their own and construct that play. We get that back.
I love that, and I wish I had this mic to you that whole time, so whoever is listening could hear the whole thing. But to very much summarize what you said so eloquently, I think first of all, acknowledging that ed tech conversations are being had at administrative levels, board levels, which is really promising. And also just your mention of boredom, and I think, you know, the question too, what are we replacing this want for smartphones or devices? And I think the answer has to be boredom, and being okay with our kids being bored. And as a parent of 3 right now, and my oldest is 6, I have a 4 and a 3-year-old as well, so I'm never bored. They tell me they're bored all the time. And as a parent, I can acknowledge how hard it is to listen to the whining of, Mom, I'm bored, what do I do now? And the easy thing would be like, here, just take the iPad. And trust me, I have had moments where that has happened. But I think to say, like, we have to get back to boredom is beautiful and can be very hard for parents. I think we have to acknowledge that that is so challenging, but it is so necessary. And, you know, I teach high school, I can also say, like, man, they need to learn how to be bored again because they have no idea what to do. So yeah, so I think that's kind of part of it. And to say it's not easy, right? It's not easy, and I think if we acknowledge that it's not easy, but that we're all going through it, and
I think we live in a different world. Like, prior to that, I do think we live in a different world. We have so many more where both parents are working. And so the energy levels at the end of the day are different than years ago when you had somebody at home. I think we need to acknowledge that. Our world is not the same. It can't be what it was. All right? But we do need to find ways in which we can help our kids to learn to self-engage, engage with the things around them, engage with the toys that we've purchased, but be thoughtful about what you purchase too. Things that they can make and change and do different things, rather than just I get instant feedback from it. So be really thoughtful about the kinds of things that you have at home that they can engage in. Things where they can manipulate it and turn it around. Lego has always been amazing, and connects and I don't know, my kids had Playmobil World and the things that they did in there, it was insane, all of the conversations that you could listen to. So thoughtful thinking about what kind of toys that they have at home and how to re-engage them in that. And sometimes it's prompts from parents to say, oh, well, does this have a library? You can make some little books for it. Or does it, or have you tried, or could you stretch it? And then it gets them back into it. So helping them to re-engage in the play rather than, I'm bored, I don't know what to do. Those little things can be really valuable.
I love that. Thank you. Okay, are there any other questions? Yep.
It's kind of an accumulation from all these wonderful comments and questions, which is, we make this pledge, okay, we'll delay smartphone until 14. I think ultimately, though, one of the biggest problems, and it was mentioned earlier, is parent use. So what's the parent pledge so that you're not saying, do as I say, not as I do? Because quite honestly, we are just as addicted, just brains are less neuroplastic as those kids. So I think we're kind of cocky sometimes as adults. We're like, I'm fine. No, we're super addicted. So what would you say, maybe some top points that you pledge as a parent if you're actually going to engage in this that can help the kids?
Yeah, okay, so just quick reiteration. So we talked about the parent pledge, the Unplugged pledge, which is for parents to commit to delaying smartphones until their kids are at least 14. But what does that look like for parents, and how can we as parents also model maybe these behaviors that we're expecting and manage our own use and maybe even problematic use if some of us are affected by that, which I think is becoming more and more normal.
Yeah, I think this is such a great point, and I do think it's putting the phone away. I think it's the simplest thing. But I think it's also okay to be a parent about, be a grown-up about this, in the sense that, my kid sees me drink coffee, my kid sees me drink wine, he knows those are grown-up things, right? And appropriate amounts of wine, just to so, smartphone is a grown-up thing. I need it for work, right? If somebody from work with somebody from work is calling, I need to do a work call. So I think helping contextualize it as a grown-up thing is important. While I have the mic, I just wanted to be joined by a VIP, so I wanted to acknowledge that, and that's Jenny Perez, who is the founder of Unplugged Canada, who's from Vancouver, actually, and is in Ottawa at the moment doing some lobbying and advocacy. So when I said earlier, we're part of a movement. Jenny is our fearless leader. So thank you for joining us and being in Ottawa to do advocacy.
I actually just left the Hill. Polier's wife, Anna, was presenting, and with other panelists, but I couldn't resist coming here, leaving that presentation and coming here to see Black in action. And first of all, I want to recognize and thank Tara, Alex, Holly, nice to meet you, for taking time out of their families and volunteering, showing up here, and sharing all that they know because they care so much. And yeah, I'm very, I cannot help it, but whenever I go to schools, I get so touched because when Unplugged was born, the whole point of it was to build community. I'm Latina, as you can tell, and I felt that we were losing that more and more with the traction that these devices were getting in our schools and in our homes. And then to be now able to use the voice, our voice, to speak to politicians, to make change, is also humbling and also empowering. And I want to also remind you that even though sometimes we feel powerless, that each of you have a voice that actually I didn't know my voice was that powerful until I actually decided to use it at school, decided to use it with my community, and now I use it with politicians and anybody because I care so much and because we know it's about children, so there's no reason why we shouldn't do it. And I thank you for being here, but I also want to thank you for opening your mind to the information that you have received, because we know that this topic can be a little bit sensitive still for some of us. Please listen a little bit and then take something with you and spread the word and take a little bit of action, because 2 years ago we would have never thought, many parents said, we're defeated, just get over it. That's what I kept hearing and hearing. But now I actually feel the other way around, and Alex knows, because Alex is such a powerful voice everywhere he goes, that there is a bill coming, and that's going to be the start of the generational change that we all want. And then we parents are going to find it a little bit easier to do this at home. And however, as you were talking about, we also need to be more intentional about how we play a role leading by example, because our kids are always looking at us. I'm sorry, but I'm Latina and my emotions always take over. Thank you very much.
Actually, maybe I'll add a quick point to that last part too. I think as much as you can model kind of healthy social media use or behaviors with your phone as well for kids, so two big things are especially nighttime use, kind of limiting phones or devices in the bedroom, and also even just narrating what you're using your phone for. As Alice kind of mentioned, like, oh, I just need to send a quick email, or oh, I'm gonna order groceries, or kind of just, I guess, explaining what you're using your phone for and trying to show those kind of healthy behaviors.
Awesome, thank you. I feel like I could add a whole bunch of other things, and I have so many things that I would love to keep talking about. And I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question, but I also want to be mindful of time. We've gone past 8 o'clock, so I just want to say thank you so much, all of you, for being here. Thank you to Severn Severn. I keep saying that wrong. I don't know why I want to say Severn. But anyway, Severn Avenue School Council for having us here, to Alex and Holly for taking the time out of your evening to share your expertise. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask. There are flyers about Unplugged Canada specifically at the back. You're welcome to take that with you. There's a QR code if you want to go online and sign the pledge if you do feel called to join this movement. There's also a paper copy if you'd rather just handwrite and fill out the pledge that way. We are happy to add it in. We're at over 10,000 pledges across Canada, which is a milestone we just hit, I think, last week. So great news, but we're still trying to build that. So please join us if you resonated with anything tonight. And we will leave it at that. Thank you so much, and have a great evening, everybody.